everyone. My name is Amy Williams, and I'm the Director of the Office of Advocacy Relations at NCI. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here to have a panel discussion about advocacy at the National Cancer Institute. I appreciate all of you out there who are tuning in, and I want to especially thank the advocates, Patty, Desiree, and Carol, who you will hear more from soon. I want to thank them for joining us today in this discussion. We're here to talk a little bit about the Office of Advocacy Relations first and how we work with the advocacy community. And then I'm going to turn it over to our three panelists to talk a little bit about their work as advocates with us here at NCI. So let's get started. As you may have heard us all say before in the advocacy office, we really see ourselves as the front door for advocates. We exist to give advocates an entry point into the National Cancer Institute. OAR, which is what we call ourselves, works with individual research advocates like the three advocates joining me today, as well as local and national advocacy organizations. We are here and we work with the advocacy community to ensure that the collective patient perspective is what we like to call it. So the true perspective of patients is included in NCI's research efforts, and that we use the collective patient to advance cancer research, improve patient outcomes. The advocacy office, in addition to working with advocates, also works with NCI researchers to identify opportunities to plug in advocates to our research portfolio and our research activities. And we really try to work with the researchers and the advocates and facilitate a meaningful activity and dialogue between the scientists and the patients. As you can see in this slide, we currently have a growing network of over 250 advocates that span all different cancer types, geographic regions, and demographics. NCI works with our advocates to include them in steering committees, advisory committees, peer review, workshops, and so much more. And, all of those engagements that I just spoke about are ways that we engage individual advocates. We also work with advocacy organizations who fund cancer research to help identify gaps in research priorities at NCI and the advocacy community funded engagements, and also sort of areas of synergy where we can work together to fund research together. In 2019, last year, which feels very long ago, NCI referred 77 advocates to new research activities, but that number, 77, only includes advocates that our office directly connected into programs at NCI. As you all probably know, there are many, many more advocates that are engaged in long-term projects and advisory boards, and that work with NCI-funded extramural programs like NCTN or the SPORE program, and advocates who have existing relationships with NCI staff. So that number 77, I think, is important for people to understand, to get a sense of how frequently we're working with advocates, but also know that it is much bigger. So with that, I will stop talking about the advocacy office for now, but I am open, as well as the staff of the advocacy office, to having future conversations with any of you individually about our work and how to work with NCI. And so at this point, I'm going to turn us over today to the three breast cancer advocates who were joining us and who we have had the privilege of working with here at NCI over the past several years. As you can see, we have Carol Boz, Desiree Walker, and Patty Spears with us today. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about what committees and programs they work with here at NCI and sort of what their role as an advocate is in those activities. Desiree, I'll start with you, and then we'll work our way across the panel.
Well, thank you, Amy. Appreciate the invitation to just join this distinguished panel. I'd like to start off by saying that advocacy was definitely not on my radar as something to do as I was trying to figure out what I do in life. However, once I had my second breast cancer diagnosis, I'll say my recurrence, I realized that it was important for me to do more in the space because of the many needs that existed. And so I got involved with many different organizations, and I've met many wonderful advocates over the year. And in a conversation with an advocate that I knew, they had inquired whether or not I had ever thought about getting involved with the Central IRB, an area that they had sat on for many years. And I said yes. And so one of the roles that I have with the NCI, I sit on the advisory board for the CPC, or Cancer Prevention and Control Central IRB, and I've done that for several years. In my role, I have the opportunity on a monthly basis, the group convenes, and there are several studies, new studies that are being proposed, and I may be assigned a study. And if I'm assigned a study, I basically review the entire protocol in order to give the patient perspective. Oftentimes, I focus primarily on the informed consent to just really make sure that the information that is there is clear and in plain language. One of the things that I have done in more recent time, but initially I was trying to cover many areas, and I realized that my focus needed to be on the patient experience. And that was my wheelhouse, that was my area of expertise. And so I left it to the pharmacists to focus on the drug aspect, and I left it to the statistician to focus on that area. But what I try to do is to always give the patient perspective to the conversations, because I think that sometimes that voice is not often reflected in studies. And we also have an opportunity for each of us that sit on that board to learn something from one of our colleagues, because we all have different areas of expertise. And recently, I had the opportunity to join SWOG, Recruitment and Retention Committee. And as a result of me bringing the patient advocate voice to that committee, I am also on the SWOG Patient Advocate Committee as well. I'm new to that group, and so basically I have been trying to work with them to always add value from the patient perspective, but we're also creating some curriculum surrounding DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've been working on both the recruitment and retention side as well as the patient advocate side to help create the curriculum. I've had the opportunity to review some field guides that are being created. And so at the end of the day, my goal, my desire is always to make sure that the patient voice is always heard and understood. I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Boss. So I was diagnosed with early stage breast cancer in 2004. And at the time, I was a young mother. I had a newborn, and I had a daughter who was 2.5, and cancer was not on my radar. So fast forward about a year, and I was the type of patient who would show up at my doctor's office with a written list of questions and a stack of journal articles. And he looked at me one day and he said, have you thought about getting involved in advocacy? And I was not familiar with advocacy at that point. But I credit him with opening a door for me that I never envisioned. So after that start, the charge to explore advocacy, I discovered advocacy activities at a number of different organizations, including the NCI. So now I am involved in NCI-oriented activities in several different areas. I am a SPORE advocate for the kidney cancer program at UT Southwestern in Dallas. In that program, we have a patient council, and we we participate in and monitor all of the SPORE activities, and SPORE stands for Specialized Programs of Research Excellence. It's a special NCI type program in all different types of cancers. It's very important that the patient voice be included in those discussions, and so that's where our patient council fits in. I'm also a patient advocate with ECOG Akron, which is one of the NCTN, the National Clinical Trial Network groups. I am a participant, I'm an advocate for the breast group, and I'm also the primary advocate for the experimental imaging group. My role at ECOG Akron is to review protocols when they come through our committees, to make sure that the patient perspective is included, included in the discussion, and that any potential issues, red flags that we see that might affect accrual, for example, accrual to the trial, are identified early on in the process. We also look to see whether the trials will be accessible to a wide range of participants. We want to make sure that the trials are going to appeal to the patient community and will be worthwhile. My biggest involvement with NCI activities, however, is as the lead advocate for for the Physical Sciences and Oncology Network, or the PSON. This was a program that was started about 12 years ago by the NCI to engage physical scientists who are engineers, physicists, chemists, computer scientists, mathematicians in cancer research. So this is a group of researchers who really don't, have a history of working in cancer research, but it's becoming more and more important. And when the program first started, the idea was to pair the cancer researchers who are already involved in this type of program with the physical scientist. From the very beginning, there was an interest in including the patient voice in this program, and that's where I fit in. So my background actually is biomedical engineering, and I heard about the program from another advocate and inquired as to whether or not I could, be involved. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to be the national advocate for the program, which means that it's a volunteer position in which I coordinate all of the advocacy activities across all of the centers and projects that are within our network. And because of this, I have been able to see and participate in a wide range of activities that are being done. Everything from educational programs that are targeted towards young children to get them interested in science, to actually, being in the lab and seeing firsthand what research is being done. And lately, what I've been doing is I've been speaking to a lot of the academic programs that are associated with the network and letting them know what it's like to actually be a cancer patient, to have gone through treatment, and what the cancer patient community's needs and wants are in terms of research. So with that, let me go ahead and pass it on to Patty Spears.
So I'm Patty Spears, and it's just an honor to be here with Carol and Desiree and Amy. And so my experience is a lot like the others. I was diagnosed in 1999, and I was actually involved in advocacy and AIDS advocate. So at that time, so advocacy came easy to me. It was an easy switch to go from AIDS to breast cancer at the time. And I really got involved with NCI at the local level through a local breast SPORE as well. And now I'm involved in in the University of North Carolina Lineberger Breast Score, where we work really closely with the local researchers funded through NCI, through the Breast Score. And we have advocates on every project, and we're currently starting a patient-centered biospecimen collection program at UNC that's really headed by the Breast Score advocates. We have about 9 right now. That's kind of where I got started. It's really easy to get started locally. And then I got involved when I was at the Duke Breast Sport to the National Clinical Trials Network, or at that time it was the cooperative groups through CALGB, which is now the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. So I'm really involved with the Alliance at this point. I'm chair of the Patient Advocate Committee and on the Breast Committee. But as chair of the Patient Advocate Committee, I'm really involved in a lot of the different decisions being made and trying to make sure the advocates are involved in their committees as well. And the advocates of the NCTN and the cooperative groups, just like ECOG, Akron, and SWAB, we're involved from the very beginning of when a trial is first thought of as just an idea, in the committee meetings where we can make comments and bring up concerns that are important to patients at very early time points in trial development, through when a concept is written. We all review the concepts before they go up to NCI to be reviewed. And then when they come back for protocol development, an advocate at the Alliance is put on every protocol development team so we can put more input into the study to look at eligibility criteria, make sure there's no significant barriers to patient accrual, and to review the consent form at that point. And then it doesn't stop there. One of the things we do at the Alliance that I'm really proud of is that when trials are published, we try to write public summaries of the published results in plain language so that everybody can see what's happened. So there's quite a few on the website of the Alliance that the patient advocates have been heavily involved in writing those public summaries and getting information out to the public about clinical trials in an understandable way. And also I'm involved in a couple of the committees that make decisions. So I'm on the Breast Cancer Steering Committee at the time, and so we review all the concepts coming from the NCTN groups. But I'm also on the Investigational Drug Steering Committee. And I just started that committee, and it's so different, and it's going to be really exciting being on that committee where you're looking at really phase 1 type studies and new drugs coming through. So that's going to be a different experience for me. So it's a learning experience. Even though I've been doing this since 1999, this is a learning experience. And I'm also on the Correlative Science committee as well, looking at when people apply to use the samples that were obtained through the NCTN cooperative group studies and they want to do correlative science studies. I'm on that committee as well. And then I also got involved on a project at NCI, which I've never been involved in before, to the NCI COVID-19 and cancer patient study. And so I'm part of that study group. And that's been really a different experience as well, being a part of a very large group. But then we broke out into smaller subgroups, and I was on the group that looked at the patient-reported outcomes and quality of life instruments that were put in the First Amendment, and now we're looking at social determinants of health. So that's been another experience with NCI that I really think is somewhere advocates can be involved in a very different way.
That's terrific. Thank you, Patty, and thank you, Carol and Desiree. I want to connect and listening to you guys all talk before we move into the discussion questions. I want to connect a couple dots between the comments that all of you guys made. For advocates who are not as familiar with NCI, NCI is a research enterprise. We're the federal government's research enterprise, and we conduct and fund research across the country. And as I listen to all three of you, I want to mention that NCI's research sort of spans the continuum that starts with basic research, moves to moves to translational research, and moves through clinical and then healthcare delivery research. And when I listen to you speak, you guys are doing such cool work to bring the patient's voice to all aspects of research throughout that continuum. When I listen to Carol talk about the physical sciences program in cancer research, that's an example of a very basic research-oriented program where she's bringing the collective patient perspective. And Carol, you also mentioned the SPORE program, which at NCI we have a ton of acronyms, and so many people may not know what the SPORE program is, but that is a true and long-standing translational research program for disease-specific cancers, and that is really where we're moving from bench to bedside, and there are many advocates involved in SPORE. So that's a great example of how advocate voices are being included in the translational portion of our portfolio. And then all three of you, appropriately so, are involved in the more clinical segment of our research portfolio through NCI's Clinical Trials Network. Each of you are working with different components of that network, and as well as the steering committees that review some of the clinical trial concepts coming out of the many components of that network. And it's really cool to hear the different ways that you have helped join the researchers and steer the researchers in the different components. Patty, you talked about pretty much all aspects of protocol development, and it's so cool how over the years the advocates have really become embedded in the work of that clinical trials network. So thank you. And to move on to some of our discussion questions, Carol, I'm going to start with you because you have worked across all continuums. Can you give us your thoughts on what best practices you've learned as an advocate through these different engagements, and what best practices you would share with other advocates?
Sure. So I do want to point out that at the Physical Sciences and Oncology Network, we do go from basic through actual clinical work. So it really is an opportunity to see that entire continuum of research. And I also wanted to point out to all of our viewers that to get to the clinical stage of research, you have to start somewhere. And so it's extraordinarily important that advocates play a role in basic research. That's where everything starts. We know that not everything that is explored in basic science is actually going to make it to the clinic, and that's okay. We're learning along the way, but it's just vitally important that the advocate, the patient voice, really is highlighted in all of these areas of research. So in terms of best practices, though, one of the things that I found is just being able to communicate in a common language. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing in the PSON, the Physical Sciences and Oncology Network, is learning how to talk to different communities. You want to be able to get your message across. You want to be able to explain to the patient community what's being done in these very technical areas of research. And on the flip side, you also want to be able to let the researchers know what's important to patients. So being able to speak these various languages, whether it's you're speaking medicine, you're speaking patient, you're speaking engineering, all of those are important in the total discussion. So I hope that
Absolutely.
helps.
Yeah, no, terrific. That's very important, and it highlights the role that advocates play, where you're sort of the conduit between your constituents and the other advocates. So you need to be able to speak clearly to them, but you also are playing a different game when you're communicating with researchers. So you're really the conduit with two very different groups, and that critical link for connecting the two. Patty, I'll turn it over to you now, and I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your perspective on the value of research advocacy, and then if you have any follow-up thoughts on best practices, that would be good to hear from you.
So for best practices, I mean, my key thing is don't expect the same thing from every committee or engagement that you have. They're all unique and different, and you have to be adaptable to those different environments. So don't over expect things. Oh, this happened before, it should happen again. And just be really open to different things and to listen. When you're in meetings, listen to what others say before you speak is always a good idea. Those are my two things that I say. to everyone. And what I think the value is, I think patients bring a different perspective, not only the patient perspective, but a very broad common sense perspective. Sometimes people get so caught up in details that they miss the big picture. And I think we can see that a little bit better, and we don't have as many conflicts. Sometimes I've been in meetings where I've mentioned something and I would talk to someone on the side and they'd say, oh, that was a great comment. And I'm like, so why didn't you say it? Why didn't you back me up? Well, they couldn't because they were a competitor, right? And it would seem like that was the reason why they were making that comment. And so I don't have a dog in the fight, so I can say what I really think, and usually that's what everybody wants to hear. And so we're kind of that neutral person in the room that can kind of bring these things up that are just those big picture things, as well as what Desiree really, I think, articulated it really well about bringing that patient voice to the table. We know what the burden is. We know what, when they say 30-minute infusion, I've never had a 30-minute infusion. It's always been 4 hours or 8 hours, right? So just different things like that. We can keep that on the forefront of every concept going forward as well.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Patty. And Desiree, I'll turn it over to you. If you have any thoughts on the value of advocacy or best practices, as Carol and Patty have both commented on. And then also for you in particular, I was wondering if you could, if you have any advice for other advocates looking to get more involved in research advocacy, what would that advice be to them?
So I think that, everyone that has gotten involved in advocacy is quite passionate. And if you are definitely, someone who has been diagnosed, one of the things that I would say is very important is to get involved after you've taken the time to take care of yourself and be healthy. Oftentimes, immediately after a diagnosis, people want to do more. But I always say that that's a time where you need to focus on self. And once you're healthy, you'll be able to bring your best self to whatever endeavors you undertake. I also think that it's important, although you may have lived experience, I think it's important to continue to educate yourself. There are many conferences, ASCO as well as AACR, that have programs for advocates to help to educate you. Also, there are many disease-specific programs, and there's also RAN and Research Advocacy Network. And there are many other groups that offer trainings. Some of them are certain times of the year, and others that are self-paced that you can do online. It is so important for you to continue to educate yourself so that when you go out to advocate, whether you sit on any type of group, you want to make sure that you have the latest information at the end of the day. It's also important that, although we're all passionate, that you make sure that, your communication is clear and concise, and that it's not projected that it's all about you that you're talking about, but you're talking about the collective group in terms of patients, survivors, thrivers, etc. I definitely think that advocacy is so important because it is actually, it offers a sense of healing for those that have been diagnosed, but it also is a very empowering thing. And all the individuals that I have met over the years who have been involved in advocacy, always comment on how they feel that they're giving back. They're paying forward. They're making a difference in the lives of others who have also been touched by disease. And I think that advocacy, we need to continue pushing the envelope to make sure that patient advocates are really fully immersed in the research realm because they bring such a perspective that is vital if we are really going to make sure that research is for all of us. And in terms of, if individuals want to get involved, I say, you have to initially, at least this was my approach, you have to sit back and learn. There are many people who have had the opportunity to be involved. Seek someone who can be either a mentor or a peer buddy. and learn the road. I always say that, we don't necessarily have to have all the bumps and bruises. If we just find someone or many people that you can actually create a circle in order to support you in your growth as an advocate.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Desiree. And there's, I think, your comments about how to get engaged and all of your comments on best practices are super helpful. And Desiree, you really summed that up nicely, and sort of gave me a nice segue to, communicate to all of you listening that if you're interested in learning more about advocacy at NCI, you can contact the advocacy office. As I mentioned at the top of this panel, we are the front door for advocates at NCI, and we would love to hear more about you as an individual, your perspective, and share with you what NCI is up to. And so with that, I want to thank all of you for your time today and for your perspective. You guys are doing amazing work that really makes a difference for patients across the country and helps advance research faster and improves the quality of our research. So I can't thank you enough. I'm used to seeing everyone in person at different meetings, and it's so sort of bittersweet. I'm glad to be able to see you today, but I wish that we were able to see each other more. So everybody, thank you so much. Hang in there. And again, if you're interested in learning more about advocacy at NCI, please reach out to us. We would love to get to know you and share work related to NCI's research and the advocacy that's involved at NCI. So thank you all for your time today.
crime can prevent cancer, or does it cause cancer?
I don't think this video is about scolding those people that love and care and those people that have misstepped with their words.
Have you tried yoga? Yeah, I have.
I think this is really about the MBC community having a good laugh.
Have you swam in Lake Tiki?